Good evening. I'm Courtney Graham with the Engagement Department at the Art Institute of Chicago. Welcome to today's virtual artist talk with Hebrew Brantley. We're so glad to have you joining us virtually, and we hope that this digital format can offer a chance to stay connected to the Art Institute from home. This program is being recorded, so if you'd like to revisit it in the future, you'll be welcome to do so. Now I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. Hebrew Brantley creates narrative-driven work revolving around conceptualized iconic characters, which he utilizes to address complex ideas around nostalgia, the mental psyche, power, and hope. Alongside these characters, Brantley uses vibrant color palettes and pop art motifs to create a sense of accessibility for these layered and multifaceted ideas. Majorly influenced by the South Side of Chicago's Afro-Cobra movement in the 1960s and 70s, Brantley uses the lineage of mural and graffiti as a frame to explore his inquiries. Recognized nationally for his public works and solo shows in Chicago, Hebrew Brantley has exhibited in London, San Francisco, Atlanta, Miami, Seattle, Los Angeles, and New York, and at venues including Art Basel, Switzerland, Art Basel, Miami, Scope, NYC, and Frieze, London. His work has been collected by former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, the Pritzker family, and power couple Jay-Z and Beyonce. Brantley has also collaborated with brands like Nike and Adidas. Brantley earned a BA in film from Clark Atlanta University and has a background in design and media illustration. Joining Hebrew in conversation today is Tempest Hazel, curator, writer, and founder of 60 Inches from Center, a Chicago-based arts publication and archiving initiative that has promoted and preserved the practices of BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ artists and artists with disabilities across the Midwest since 2010. Her exhibitions and projects have been produced with University of North Texas, Southside Community Arts Center, Terrain Exhibitions, the Black Metropolis Research Consortium, the Smart Museum of Art, and the University of Chicago. Her writing has been published with Candor Arts, UChicago Press, Tremaine Foundation, Prospect 4, Alphawood Exhibitions, Haymarket Books, Duke University, and more. Hazel also serves as the Arts Program Officer for the Field Foundation, where she works with organizations, collectives, and artists to give grants and other support to culturally anchored, justice-driven, and cross-sector community care work led by BIPOC organizations in historically and systemically divested communities of Chicago. Thank you both to Hebrew and Tempest for being here with us today. Now I'll turn things over to Tempest.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So first I want to say hi, Hebrew, just to say hello, and how are you doing?
I'm good. It's been more than a minute, but it's really good to see your face.
It has been a minute. So, that kind of, when the Art Institute first asked me to have this talk with you, I had a complete full circle moment that I want to kind of share with you to start things off. So I really associate your work with my first years in Chicago. And I came to Chicago in 2007. I live in Bronzeville, which I know is your home neighborhood. And the first dozen or so contemporary artists who were a big part of my introduction to the city, you were one of those artists. And ultimately, you're part of a group of artists who really shaped my understanding of Chicago early on. And I think something else that came to mind was a little known fact that 60 Inches from Center actually gets its name from an exhibition that happened in 2010 at Columbia College that you were a part of. So it really kind of brings everything full circle to be talking with you today. And then even more so, I started to think of other times that I've encountered your work over the past decade or so. I began to think about seeing your work at 3P's Art Lounge, the spot that Maya Camille Broussard used to have back in the day. I also started to think about some of the open studio events that you would have and the parties that you would have in your studio. I started to think about like some of the early like immersive installation experiences that you had at places like Lacuna, that now, you know, I really see the threads between that and Nevermore. And then, you know, like the show that you had at the Cultural Center, which was really amazing. Like all of these memories just started to pop up for me. So leading into this talk, it was really a nice way to kind of track the evolution of your work alongside my personal experiences of your work over the years. And it brought a new meaning to the word nostalgia for me when it comes to your work. So it's really, really good to see you. And so I'll kind of dive into some questions at this point. So the first question I have is just to kind of revisit the original question I started with of how are you doing? Because it's been a wild year. And, you know, I also want to know, how is LA treating you? And it's appropriate to kind of like sit with this slide because you got like the palm trees in the background. And that's such a change from Chicago to LA.
Yeah.
So just want to start there with the temperature check.
Yeah, I mean, temperature check, you know, 73 degrees, partly cloudy. You know, I think all is well. Like, change of venue, change of scenery. I think it did me a little good, you know, though my heart will always be in Chicago. It was one of those things where I kind of needed to go, you know, and try something different for a little while. But yeah, I think all is well. I mean, obviously it was a really challenging year for everybody. But, you know, I think my focus was more just family and then, you know, work, creating. You know, I just sort of kept my head down and just went. And I think that, you know, I'm really thankful for this past year in a lot of ways. And I mean, obviously, I know that it was, you know, a lot of tragedy, you know, that befell this year. But like, I'm thankful, you know, in the ways that it brought me closer to my family, to friends. It brought me closer to my relationship with the work, you know, and in a way that I don't necessarily know would have happened, I think, as fast as it did over the course of last year. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I really want to kind of continue with that and just hear a little bit about how perhaps your studio practice has changed, or when you say your understanding of the work has changed, what do you mean by that?
Well, just, you know, I think it's sort of all encompassing. It's my understanding of myself, my position as a man, as a Black man, as a father, as a brother, you know, as a husband. And so with all of that brings about, you know, just an evolution, you know, it's constant, I think. And so, you know, it started from there, and it started with, you know, again, a firmer understanding of those positions that helped inform what I'm putting out into the world, or what's going into, you know, my studio practice, and how to, you know, the older you get, you know, the more precious time becomes. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is that, you know, I want to be able to, I don't want to be spread thin. I don't want to overwork myself or kill myself. And I want to be able to use my time extremely wisely, and you know, and do a great deal, many things, but not sort of burn myself out or burn the candle on both ends. And so that was one of the big things that I, you know, last year allowed me to take that time to figure that out, you know, because the pressure wasn't, it wasn't there. It wasn't, you know, the world stopped for a while, for, you know, a time. And, you know, having that time to reflect, having that time to sit and work and dive in and really explore my thoughts and assess where I was as an individual. You know, again, it was great. It was great. It was, you know, it was almost much needed in that way. But, you know, we're not afforded that time normally, I think. You know what I mean? It's like the world is constantly going. And I mean, not that it fully stopped, but, you know, it did come to some sort of halt. And I think that that forced me to sort of stop what I was doing and really think about what I was doing and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do those things. So yeah, it was just really important, really, really important. And I think
Yeah.
that, it also it matured me in a lot of ways, that
Hmm.
that I didn't necessarily realize in that particular moment, but kind of coming out of this, I definitely have.
Yeah. Wow. So diving a little bit into the work, I feel like hours could be spent really kind of unpacking your work, but if your work had liner notes, if I was speaking in like musical terms, or if it had footnotes and in like writing terms, it would really be its own book. It would be pretty thick. And in your work, I've always seen what's happening in the background in a way, or in the shadows of your work, or even some of the intricate line work that you've done in your paintings in the past, as a kind of bibliography that gives additional insight into the work beyond what you might get from a quick read of it.
Right.
So I think anyone who sees your work or has heard you talk about your work, it's easy to pull references to like comics. You talk about DC and Marvel, and we see some of those images here, but also cartoons like Muppets and Jim Henson, and also street art and graffiti and hip hop. You have a song titled Midnight Marauders, which I really appreciate that type of reference. And you even have like some of the deep historical references, like Courtney mentioned, Afro Cobra, and you talk about Tuskegee Airmen and Basquiat, Keith Haring, all of these different references. But I'm curious for you, what are some of the things that people miss within your work that you're referencing? Those seem like the easy grabs, the things that are easily visible, more easily visible. But I'm curious if there are things that maybe are overlooked that people don't see.
I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question to quantify, because, when you put the work out, you put it out and let those rip it apart, interpret it, etc. But I think that, I don't know if it's missed, but I think it's, upon first visit with some folks, not all, it's dismissed as, cartoonish or illustrative, or, and not painterly. And I think that, for me, in my approach is always, looking at how to create new narratives visually in a way that like I can evolve and grow, not just staying in one space, but switching lanes comfortably in a way that, it has a little harmony to it. I think that's sort of the biggest thing. Again, a lot of the references and things that I pull from, can be considered pop, and that's fine. But I think that for me, that's always been a way to kind of reel folks in, because, people tend to lean into the familiar. And if you've seen, if you see something in my work that feels familiar, it's like, come in, come look a little closer, and then, explore all, right? Not just, what's sort of on the surface, or what's in the front. So that's, that's I guess kind of a big thing in terms of how I, view everything.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder about the audience of your work. And there are just so many, your work operates in so many different realms that it makes it hard to really locate who the audience is. And it also opens up a lot of possibilities of who the audience could be. And I would like to hear you talk a little bit about who you see the audience of your work being, because I think it's just so wide. There's so many possibilities, and what you're saying about what's dismissed in your work, I think, is directly also linked to that, of who it's speaking to, how you're bringing them into the work, and then also where your work is placed out in the world. So who's your audience?
In terms of the audience, I think it's extremely wide. I don't know if I can like certain, pinpoint exactly who, and I think that is maybe a part of the charm, but also a part, it's like to, to sort of, not detriment, that's a strong word, but, you know, it works and it doesn't work. I think with a lot of artists, you can kind of, qualify who their audience is. And at least while they're alive, right? And then when they die, it definitely opens up. But I don't know. I mean, I like the idea that my audience is everyone and anyone. For me, because that's in that music, right? Isn't that hip hop? Isn't that soul music? Isn't that pop music? And for me, art was never a thing that was like, high art was never a thing that was like really pronounced where I come from, or understood. And, if I can be a conduit to somebody coming from where I come from to understand or even get into art and creating, that's what it's about. So I don't know. I mean, in terms of that audience, again, I appreciate it being any and all, or none. But I don't create with the intention to cater to one specific side.
Yeah, and I think one of the many things that I appreciate about your work, and as it enters into different spaces, it's like it almost leaves breadcrumbs and unlocks the door. Because for me, I know with my own writing, I think about like, if my parents read this, what are they going to get out of it? Are they going to enjoy it? If my nieces and nephews read this, are they going to enjoy it? Are they going to find something in it that is for them? And one of the more powerful elements of your work for me is that it welcomes that into the space. Like, it welcomes the people I know, like the people of my life, into a space where they can relate and they see the work and they're like, oh, this place is, I'm meant to be here. Like, this place is for me. I see it in the work. Like, this work is speaking to me and it's referencing things that are directly related to my life and my experience and what I know. Which I think is an interesting thought when you also think about the way that a lot of spaces are historically not made for my nieces and nephews, for instance, or are places that my parents might not be as comfortable in because it doesn't, the work isn't necessarily a reflection of them.
That's the constant conversation, right? I mean, people and institutions are, I think, slowly getting to work on that problem, because it is a problem. But it's a constant conversation. And again, for me, it's like, I've never asked for permission, and damn sure don't ask for forgiveness in most cases. And so, it's like it or love it, I think, with the things that I do. And again, if they don't exist in certain institutional, settings, they exist on prints, t-shirts, collectibles, and household goods, right? And you can kind of keep that message floating beyond just those walls of the institution, and beyond just those folks that visit those places, that folks that travel to again, a wide array of different opportunities to like create moments with the work, not just within a certain space. And so I'm sorry, I mean to interrupt you.
No. No, I hear you. And yeah, there's so I want to keep with my questions, but there's so many roads to go down when it comes to that conversation. But I do want to talk about the characters of your work and the narrative. And one thing I really appreciate about your work and your practice has been just your dedication and commitment to these characters, and the whole crew that kind of surrounds them. And they've been with you for a while, so it's visible how that's allowed them to evolve, whether it's within the universe that they're within or them existing in our universe. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how has your understanding of them as characters evolved over time since you have spent so much time with them? Are there new things that you discover about them as you continue painting them?
It's a good question. I don't know if it's symbiotic, right? It's you know, it's like, you know, asking Charles Schultz how he feels about the Peanuts. You know, I think that you as the creator project a lot of yourself into your creation, and you know, it's not dissimilar here, where it's like, you know, again, I think there's been a huge evolution, both visibly and mature, you know, from a maturity standpoint, of the characters, of the creations, because that's just my journey. You know, that's me growing up. That's me learning more. That's me understanding more. And so, you know, it's sort of naturally, you know, put onto them, and then by that given to the rest of the world. But, you know, it's, you know, a lot of the work, and a big part of the work is just like, yeah, these are Black kids, Black characters, you know, like people of color. But it's human stories.
Yeah.
You know, I have friends from every culture, and you know, though we might not have grown up the same, watched the same thing, we have commonality. And I think that, you know, like, blue is the blood that courses through our veins. And, you know, that's something that'll never change. And it's just one of those things that, like, you know, as we're learning constantly to communicate with one another, I think that, you know, the thing that's deep down, emotion, right? Tracking that's something that, you know, everybody feels, you know, whether, you know, sometimes some more greater than others, but, you know, getting to the heart, or the idea of an emotion, and injecting that into a narrative, you know, is kind of, you know, what I try to do. I hate the word try, but it's what I do, I guess, every time I approach something.
Yeah. So, you know, portraiture is a very strong element of your work. And we're having this conversation while some incredible portrait shows are happening, particularly at the Art Institute. There's the Bisa Butler show, you know, there's the Amy Sherald and Kehinde Wiley portraits of the Obamas. And when I think of portraiture, I can't help but think of some of the greats and some of my favorite portrait artists, like Charles White or Harry James Marshall or Barkley Hendricks, and so many more. But it seems like a simple question, but I'm curious, why portraiture for you? What is it about it that really drew you in the first place and keeps you kind of going back to this, especially on the canvas?
Because it's easy. No, I think it's more just trying to get it right. You know, I haven't gotten it right yet. I think, you know, I still am a 12-year-old boy trying to copy, like, you know, out of a comic book, and get the, you know, face right, you know, the shading and you know, proportions and stuff. And I think that, you know, it's still extremely challenging to me. So that makes it fun. And you know, you can say a lot, you know, without it, you know, I don't know. It's a power behind it, man. You know, like, that's why, you know, everybody's taking selfies, right? It's like, you know, there's something to explore there. But yeah, I think it's a big part of it is just like, it's fun. That's why I do it.
And who are some of your favorite portrait artists?
I mean, you just named, like, you just took me out. Like, you took like my top three. That's a good question. I think, man, there's a lot. I'm not gonna nerd out, but I think, you know, Charles White was a big, also, you know, it's like a big introduction into fine art, into, you know, portrait work. Obviously, Barkley Hendricks. Obviously, you know, Kerry James. You can't, you know, Kerry James Marshall's work as a young aspiring artist growing up in Chicago was like, you know, R. Kelly music back in the day. You know, it was like you just, unfortunately, I don't want to bring, him up or whatever, but, it's just to say that it's in the ether. It's like, it's there, you run into it. And, man, I remember like just, always running into it. And, it was
Yeah.
a thing that I didn't know how I felt at first, right? Because it was such a jarring transition of how I saw, I think, portrait work, the Black body, Black people. But then, it's just that thing that you keep coming back to because it's like, it's something that you wrestle with it, I think, for a second. And I think that's my relationship with all great art, where it's like, damn, like it sticks to your ribs. It's like a good meal.
Yeah. Can we get the slides pulled back up by chance? And I'll continue, particularly slide 13. But I do want to ask you about your process when it comes to space and thinking about space in an expansive way. How does your approach to making the work change when you go from like an exterior wall to a canvas to an immersive kind of interior space, and then also, now that you're moving deeper into your original love of film, how does your creation process and thinking process and approach change?
I don't
or
know.
maybe it stays the same.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think it kind of stays the same. I think that, upon approach, it's the same. And then, as I start to understand what I'm attempting to do, it might change a little bit. Typically it changes during the process, which isn't always great, because it's like you probably waste a little time somewhere, in the beginning or in the middle. But in the case of Nevermore, I just, I wanted to do a little Disney World in the hood, do something that was I think very, very like a love letter to Chicago, but sort of with that hint of Afrofuturism, like creating an origin story for these characters, giving them resonance, giving them, a place to exist in beyond just the gallery space, taking them out of there, but also putting the audience into a space that was unfamiliar, but fantastic, and allow, a lot of the traditional gallery shit is you look, don't touch, and I wanted to create something that was, extremely interactive, touch, lean on, climb, but just be in the space and, create just an environment that I've always wanted to see. At the core of me, I'm a big kid, and, I love, ever since I think the first time I went to like Disneyland was like, I was maybe 12, I think, or 12, somewhere around, I don't know. But I'll never forget, I have flashes and moments of just spectacle. And, if I had the money, if I had the resources to do it, I would do it more. I would do it more often. I really get a kick out of it. Like, I really love transforming spaces, and just building backdrops to the work, to the creating worlds. And it's just something I really dig. And that's also sort of a part of my love for filmmaking, where it's like, just wanting to explore art in a different medium, like being able to create moving images, create different kinds of narrative, not dissimilar to the stuff that that I've been creating, but just, again, it's different, it's longer, it's more expressive, and a little bit more palatable for most. So but yeah, in terms of the approach to bring it all back, I think that it's always the same until it isn't.
Are any of them more challenging than others? So like as you're going back to film, or or when you're in the studio, are any of them kind of a little bit more intense for you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think they all get intense at points for sure. You know, painting can be intense. Um, I think, you know, with creating spaces and creating things like, you know, some film, short films and videos, etc. Like typically you have help, right? Where in the studio traditionally it's just kind of, you know, you doing your thing. Um, and I think that that help can sometimes either drive you crazy or give you peace of mind. Um,
Hmm.
but you know, that's sort of where things differ, I think, a little bit, you know. But yeah.
Yeah. Could we go back to slide 11 by chance? And this will be my last question before moving into some audience questions. Um, but you know, I want to go back to the world building
Mhm.
and talk about the connection of your, you know, just not even just not just the youthful spirit of your work, but just youth in your work. So your work has really developed over a period when we've gone from a kind of dreaming of a better future or better worlds that feel pretty far away, that tend to feel kind of far away, to what now I think feels like a place where many of us, particularly young folks, specifically young folks, are dreaming of things that might actually be within reach. And a lot of young folks are like really in world building mode right now. They're actively creating, as we speak, the kind of future that they want to be in right now. So if we were to talk about the future canons and artwork that would complement those futures that they're building, I feel like your work would fall into that realm. Like your work would be in the collection of their art institutes, you know. Um, but that's just my take on it. So I'm curious for you, if you see your work fitting into conversations, into political or social conversations and discussions around kind of like the current moment that we're living in, or the moment, because a lot of these conversations aren't just about like this month, this year,
Right.
the past 2 years, you know, they've been very long conversations, but particularly when it comes to the role that young folks are playing in these movements and these conversations.
Um, that was a lot, Tempest. I'm trying to um, you know, in terms of world building, you know, it's kind of a trip, man, because it's like um I just feel like we were never allowed to world build, you know,
Mm,
and even for me, like I was never really permitted to. I just did, you know, and that I think that's what sort of allows me to step apart from some. But you know, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and you know, I you know, I've been on my path for so long that I kind of forget, you know, certain things. And, you know, he was just talking to me about how like how I was in high school to college and sort of still being the same cat, but just obviously
mm,
older, more experienced and always sort of on that. And I think for me, it was like I didn't have a blueprint to build a world, you know, and so I kind of been haphazardly like piecing my shit together, you know, as I go along and adding elements and things. And um, you know, I think that it's cool now that it's more accepted, it's more acceptable to sort of be left and do things that are not considered sort of norm or conformist or directly traditional to a culture. Um, and yeah, I don't know. Give me the second part of that question because I know I didn't answer that full question.
yeah, no, just how you see the work fitting into kind of like the political and social conversations of right
Mm,
now.
mm,
And
mm.
I mentioned that because, you know, I just really feel like young folks are the ones driving a lot of the most important conversations, and really like
Sure.
bringing it up to a certain level of urgency. And there are ways in which, like, when I look at your work, I see that energy and that spirit within it. And I see those, the spaces that you're creating being the kinds that where those conversations are taking place, you know,
Mhm.
where that kind of imagining of these futures are taking place. So it's just more so to see how you see your work situated. You know, it's interesting because it's been pretty, your message has been really consistent over time. But it's as the context has as the world has shifted around it, the way that we can have conversations about your work changes. So I'm in a way kind of interested in how you see that happening, how your work is speaking to this political moment.
Sure.
From your perspective.
I think it's kind of like what I started out talking about, like this level of maturity. And, I think over the past, year plus, I really, I got bored, honestly, with what I was doing, and I wanted to pivot just for a moment, if for a moment, maybe longer, but and do some things that I felt like I've been wanting to do for a while that I was honestly a little too afraid to do because judgment, right? That's a difficult thing. And so, when you talked about like some of the works I have, I don't think we really showed any. I don't think we really gave good examples of what you were talking about with like some of the line work and the things that I do. But, for years I could almost hide things in the background, if it was a little tougher to say. And I kind of want to move the background to the foreground. And so I spent the last year really working on creating works that did just that, right? And I have an exhibition in New York opening next month in September that is just all that work. It's all that work from that moment, from that time. Not really caring about who if I offend or who I rub the wrong way. Just it's personal in that way, but it's also very reflective of the moment that I created it in, right? It was the moment that we were all figuring things out and the world was changing. So yeah, I think the new work definitely does that. As far as some of the old stuff, I think just all the work in general, it's never for me to sort of say where I think it should be or how I think it should be viewed. I think that, it was kind of cool to see, during some of the protests and things, people using some of my images to really reflect a mood and a moment, and help them say what they were trying to say. I think that felt great, and I think any artist would agree. But to have my work viewed in a certain light that, again, like I say, helps somebody say what they are thinking or what they're feeling. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where it's gonna go. I could do this show in New York and then everybody's like, yo, Hebrew's nuts. But I think that what I've been focused on is going beyond, again, the space that I've occupied for a while and really just growing up. And I think in that growth, not being afraid to say certain things that I've kind of, in the past, I've been a little gun shy, and I just, it's that thing with age. And I'm not, trying to say, oh, I'm just an old man. But I think, again, it's just, it is that thing with age where it's like, you get a little bit more courage. You've been here long enough. And it's just like, you drink a little, F it, like whatever, and I needed more of that, I think, in my studio work. And I've definitely gotten to a place where I feel really comfortable with the things that are coming out, the ideas, and the work that, is coming out this year into next. So
yeah,
I feel like it best represents me, now, purely, but also, many of folk,
Yeah. And I mean, I for one just have to say that I think that it's there, that maybe the volume of it might be shifting and changing for you, but I think that it's always been embedded in the work. At least for me, I've always seen it there. So I'd be interested to see, when you say that you kind of like take the background and put it in the foreground, what that looks like and what that means to you. So I'm really curious to see that work. So then I will turn it a little bit to the audience questions. So the first question is a very Chicago question. How does your work react to or respond to the community and history of Chicago? And I know you've talked a little bit about this, but if you could talk a little bit more.
How does it?
React to or respond?
I think just naturally, because I'm from here. You know, I grew up on the South Side. You know, I've you know, found people on the South Side. I've lost people on the South Side. You know, I've walked all these streets, you know, and just been a part of you know, many a Chicago night. And so it's like it's embedded in my DNA, and my work is my DNA. So yeah, it's simple like that.
All right, let's see, which one? What other mediums inspire you? I feel like I know the answer, part of the answer to this question, but maybe not.
It's easy. I always film first, music second. You know, I love film, man. That's, you know, it's nothing like it. So yeah.
And speaking of the film piece, when can we expect? Do you have any hints as to when we can expect to see some of the film work?
Hopefully soon. You know, like I've been working on a few projects, kind of back to back. You know, and you know, it's 3 parts to the film, to any project, right? It's like the script, what you shoot, and then the edit, and it's 3 different movies that are made. Or so right now we're in the edit. We're putting the shoe polish on it. You know, we're shining it up for the folks, and it'll be soon. You know, I'll definitely make some announcements as things get closer.
Okay, and then I think we're okay for one more. Courtney, you just let me know. Let's see. So how would you say that a mural of yours in a very public place functions differently than a piece in a private collection? And do you hope viewers interact with each one?
For sure, I hope they interact with each one, but I think it's pretty easy. It's just like, you know, public is public, private is private. You know, I think that it's a numbers game, right? So, you know, I mean, murals is a thing that I love doing. I stopped doing them a few years back, like just so I could focus on my studio practice. You know, they're very, very time consuming, and you get to a point where like you work on this thing, and then, you know, some idiot comes and puts something on it, or you know, it's temporary, right? And you have to accept that. And I think, you know, when there's moments where you can, and then there's moments where it hits a little different. So, you know, for me, it's like, I want to create things that are a little bit more lasting, a little bit more permanent consistently. So I kind of, you know, focused 100% of the energy in the studio.
Yeah. And then I think one more. Okay, I'm going to ask this one about going back to Nevermore. And thinking about a work like Nevermore Park, what do you think is the future of immersive installations and more traditional art institutions? And do you think the lines will begin to blur or the divide will become even greater between installations? Well, immersive installations in art institutions, I think.
I think that, you know, I think art institutions have always had immersive installations. That's where I first saw mine. That's what drew me to that idea, or those ideas. You know, I think it's all encompassing, right? It's all art. You know, it's just how you experience it changes a bit. But then maybe not. I don't know. But I'm here for both. So
yeah.
Anybody wants to cut a check and let me do more cool stuff in a big movie around the world, you just, you know, email me, please. And
Oh, that's a wonderful note to hit on, or to end on.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you again so much, Hebrew and Tempest, for being with us tonight and for sharing that conversation. Um, This program is presented in conjunction with the exhibition, The Obama Portraits, on view through August 15th. For more information on upcoming virtual events, please visit us online at artic.edu and look for our monthly e-news in your inboxes. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you again, Hebrew and Tempest.
Thank you. So good to see you, Hebrew.
Likewise, Tempest.